Any thoughts here about into specific scenarios? We're going to pull this all together here in this second half. I do want to quickly acknowledge, RK, you had a great comment. So that's a great point. There's always a balance. And again, that goes back to the reason why communication is so hard. All right, let's talk about the 6 leadership styles. So now I want to be clear about this. There are more than 6, and they don't always go by these names. If you went to Google the different leadership styles, you'll come across about a dozen different types. And some books address these. They'll cover certain ones more than others. Some have kind of a more a greater emphasis than others, but these are kind of the most common ones we talk about in the workplace. So I'm going to walk through these now. I did not come up with these terms, and I admit that sometimes these terms can be a little bit hard to distinguish between each other. So we'll walk through them. But the idea is that as a leader, you want to be integrating multiple styles of leadership. You can still be authentic while doing this, but the reality is, as you adjust to different scenarios, you have to be thinking about the way to reframe the way you're approaching that problem and your employees or what's happening in the workplace. So you want to be all of these 6, and again, probably even more than 6, but the goal is to be able to adjust as a leader to different scenarios and to have the toolkit and the knowledge and the awareness of what type of leader you're being in what moment. So let's talk about what these look like. The 6 leadership styles that we're going to talk about today are pace setting, authoritative, affiliative, coaching, coercive, and democratic. So let's walk through those. I'll go through these kind of quickly so that we can, again, pull everything together here at the end. But a pace-setting leader is this idea of you're just kind of moving at a fast pace, and you're having everybody just follow along with you. Do it as I do it. Like I'm doing it, you're doing it, we're all doing it. Let's just move together quickly. This is common in places where you're developing new products, where you're maybe a project manager and you're just kind of trying to push through. And everybody's kind of aware of what they're doing. You'll see what this is. It's creating an expectation that others will do as you do. You model self-direction, and you expect others to follow along with you at your pace and in your way and process. So when is it good to be a pace-setting leader? When you have a motivated and skilled team that needs little direction and when you need quick results. So, for example, like a product launch and a familiar process, everyone knows their part, and you kind of set the pace for accomplishment. That's kind of the common best practice for when you would do pace setting. So when is it bad? Well, if you use it extensively, this approach can feel a little overwhelming, especially if your team doesn't always know what to do, or if they don't know what's expected of them. If it's not really clear what you expect out of them. It can also stifle innovation because employees don't have time or the ability to provide insight or new ideas. So if you're always a pace setting leader, recognize that you're blocking the ability for your employees to be creative. You might not be recognizing some of the issues that you can't see because you're always in this sort of pace setting mode. So it's good for efficiency, good for productivity, not great for creativity, innovation, and the opportunity to speak the voice, speak opinions. Okay, so pace setting, that's the first one. We're going to move to the second one, which is very similar. I don't love the name of this one. It's often called authoritative. That doesn't mean authoritarian, meaning that it doesn't mean you're in control all the time, but rather what it means that you are in charge, you're the authority figure, and you tell people what to do, but it's a little bit more flexible than pace setting. This idea is that you kind of set the goals, you help people get there, but you kind of let them manage their own way to get there, and it's a little bit more flexible than pace setting. So you can see here, it says, come with me. You don't necessarily have to do it exactly the way I do it, but let's get there together. What it is, it's getting a team to focus on an end goal and a common vision that you develop, but in their own way. You tell them where they need to get, but to let them determine how to get there. Authoritative leadership inspires entrepreneurial spirit and enthusiasm. It gives a little bit more of that flexibility. I like to often use the example of like loan officers that work for like a mortgage company. A lot of times they have an end goal that they have to meet, but they're given the flexibility to find new customers in their own ways. They kind of manage their own business in a way. They kind of look for clients. They do all the outreach in their own style and method, and they get customers in their own unique way. But at the end of the day, they have to follow certain protocol and reach certain goals. So that's kind of the authoritative process. So when is it good? Well, when you have a skilled team, again, that needs little guidance, but when you need to change the vision or goals because the circumstances have changed. It's good when you need to boost enthusiasm toward the new goal. So if you're changing, you say, okay, we're going to make this the new goal. Again, you can figure out how to get there, but we have to follow this new goal. It tends to be a good space for the authoritative method. When's it bad? When the method doesn't work well in situations where your team may know more about the process, product, or goal than you do. And sometimes that happens when you have a very diverse team. It also doesn't work as well when your team knows little about the process, just because you're kind of expecting them to have some awareness of what to do on their own. All right, so authoritative and pace setting are very similar. But let's move into one that's different. This one's called the affiliative leadership, where you're really kind of making sure people feel happy and confident, and you're trying to build a culture of positivity. You'll see it's creating a sense of bonding and belonging. Affiliative leadership seeks to build unity and togetherness through emotional connection, praise, and support. So this is obviously, it sounds like a very positive and good thing. This is good when trust has been damaged, needs to be rebuilt, or when a team is working through a time of stress or difficulty, or when employees feel disconnected from the company, team, or project. It's also good when teams need to be emotionally charged to do something new, and they need confidence and positivity to do it. So maybe you're asking them to do something they haven't done before. We need to really build or boost their confidence. So a lot of times, especially new leaders tend to kind of gravitate towards this type of style. They think, I want to be liked. I want to create a comfortable and happy workspace. I want to make people feel confident about the work that they do. I want them to interact well with each other. That's all very good and positive things. But there is a downside, kind of a disadvantage or a problem with affiliative leadership if it's done all the time. I mean, you'll see there when it is bad. When it's used extensively, affiliative leadership can lead to mediocre performance because employees can feel a lack of direction. So again, thinking and remembering that employees do like to grow. They like growth within an organization. They like to be, they like to learn new things. They like to be given feedback when they're not doing as well. And they like to make progress towards things. Sometimes if you're overly affiliative, it can feel a little bit chaotic. If you're giving a lot of praise, you're doing a lot of team building activities, and this is sort of always this sort of environment of positive feelings. That's good, but then the growth sometimes gets lost, and also the productivity seems to die down. People feel complacent. They don't necessarily work towards improvement, and so if you're doing it all the time, we can lose some of the value of what you're getting out of actually the work side of work. So good to have once in a while. Again, be thinking about the type of leader that you tend to gravitate towards the most. Are you pace-setting, authoritative, affiliative? It's okay to gravitate towards one. You just want to make sure that you're not doing only one all the time, but that you are moving between all six of these or more than those. You want to be adjusting. All right, the coaching leader. This is developing people for future roles and projects. The goal of coaching is to help people build lasting personal strengths and to help them become more successful in their profession. So again, helping people really improve, taking the time to coach and lead that way. So this is good when you have time to develop employees when they're new to a company and when you see the opportunities for growth. But coaching doesn't work as well when your team is defiant or unwilling to learn. You know, they're already resistant to something. Maybe coaching might not be the right approach in that moment. When you lack proficiency yourself in areas that they can develop, but also coaching doesn't work well in times where there's pressing deadlines. You can really stress an employee out, and that might damage their confidence if there's a really pressing deadline. So during pressing deadlines, important, give them tasks that they know how to do and they can do well. And then maybe once a big stressful time is ended, coach them through the process so that they're better for the next time. So that you're not overwhelming them and discouraging them. But helping people grow is an important part of work, and you want to make sure you are a coach once in a while. Okay, then there's this fifth style we call coercive. And obviously this looks bad. It's kind of the idea of ruling with an iron fist. It says, do what I tell you. It's demanding compliance to what you say. You tell employees what is expected, and you require they follow your instructions, usually in a very strict way. It's like, you do it my way or the highway kind of thing. Now, surprisingly, even though this sounds terrible, and it usually is, but there are some times when you do need to be a coercive leader. So when is it good? Well, first of all, in times of crisis. So if there's a major company turnaround, layovers, restructure, major shifts, or especially if there's during actual emergency where safety is concerned. And again, we saw this during the pandemic, where we had to make very specific policies and we had to decide if we're going to enforce those policies. But during crises or emergencies, employees do look to their leaders to guide them through. They guide them through safety, but they also guide them through, a process. It's also maybe good when you have a problem teammate or behaviors need to be corrected. So if there's a really problematic employee that's causing issues with other employees, damaging your ability to get your work done, hurting the company in some way, making your company look bad with customers, you do sometimes have to step in, and your employees will expect you to be able to do that. If you're a leader that's too worried about conflict to the point where you never address issues, that can really frustrate employees too. So again, in a leadership role, you do once in a while have to enforce policies, address problematic teammates, and whatever else. Now, when is it bad though? Most of the time, if you're always a coercive leader, like people can be very resistant to that. They can feel like you're just micromanaging and telling them what to do all the time. And nobody likes to be totally controlled. So expect in the situations noted above, coercive leadership can alienate people and cause them to distrust or resent you. Coercive leadership often stifles creativity and flexibility and should only be used in situations where exact compliance is absolutely necessary. So, but it is necessary sometimes. So again, you want to have this as a part of your leadership toolkit. You want to be that coercive leader once in a while when it's necessary. Okay, and the sixth one I want to mention today is the democratic leadership. This is this idea of opening up the floor for conversation and discussion in order to improve what's happening and to really get some feedback about what's going on in the workplace. So this is building consensus through participation and conversation. Democratic leadership is open to new ideas and invites exploration, feedback, and dialogue. So this one's good when you want your team to take ownership in a new process, product, or vision. It gets them excited about doing something new, and they get to really get voice the way they're going to do it. It's also effective when you're looking for new and fresh ideas, or when you are uncertain which direction to head next. And that you should be able to acknowledge that as a leader. Like, look, we've got this challenge, and I'm not sure what the best approach is. What's your ideas? Ultimately, obviously, as the leader, you have to make the final decision, but opening it up for discussion can really make people feel like they are involved in the process, which usually improves not just culture, but also the way that they work and their productivity. When is it bad? Well, in times of crisis or emergency, or when time is of the essence, democratic leadership does tend to it slows things way down. When quick decisions need to be made, democratic leadership tends to slow the decision-making process, and it can stifle productivity. So it's great for creativity, bad for productivity. So again, toggling between like democratic and pace setting, where sometimes you need to be productive and sometimes you need to be creative. You want to make sure that both are happening at different times in the right time. Democratic leadership also may not do as well when team members aren't qualified or experienced enough to give appropriate insight. So you never want to give people kind of like a false voice where they feel like they're being heard, but then they're not actually. So if you ask people to provide insight about how to spend the budget, but they don't have access to how the budget is actually being spent, and their ideas aren't really going to be able to be implemented because nothing is going to work within the budget structure, that's giving them a sense of false voice where they feel like they're being heard, but they're not actually. So if you're going to open up the floor for discussion, then let their voices actually make a difference in the final decision. But just a quick anecdote about democratic leadership. I was working at a university a few years ago that had a new president. They just come in. They were very excited about the new direction with this new president. And the president really wanted to get everybody involved in the new strategic vision of the college, which was great. And they had everybody come together, write ideas for the direction of the college, different types of resources they wanted, different focuses for the courses and the curriculum and the, whatever else. And so there were all these different ideas. There was a lot of discussion, Post-it notes on boards, surveys and whatever else. And it was great. Everybody got really excited about it for a while. What happened, though, is that this particular president couldn't make a decision and kept asking for more and more feedback and put new committees together. And this process went on for 2 years. And by the end, no one really cared anymore. And it got frustrating that we couldn't just make some decisions and move forward. So it's good to be a democratic leader, but at the end of the day, you do also have to make a decision and help move the the institution or the organization forward. So, all right. So those are the 6 types. We'll move through those fairly quickly. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear those in the group chat. Which of the 6 leadership styles do you find yourself needing to apply the most? And then also, how well do employees respond to it? Do you have any thoughts there about any of these 6 styles? Just any kind of general thoughts. If you've done one and found it to be problematic, or if you have appreciated that, or any just general thoughts about using all 6. So as a leader, you should be a diverse leader. And again, this goes back to the Joshua Tree epiphany. We can sometimes recognize what we like or don't like in a leader, but when we try to improve it in ourselves, what can we do? Well, we need that toolkit. We need to be able to take control of it. Does it help to switch and toggle between pace setter, coaching, democratic, coercive? Of course, I would argue yes. But any thoughts about any of these? I'll give you just kind of a few seconds longer if you want to add any comments or add any questions there about the 6 styles of leadership. And sometimes it takes a little bit as you're thinking through what you have to say about it. All right, MD, that's a great question. Most people have a default style, and I would say yes. We do. Our personalities tend to lead us one direction or another. I often hear that those who do default to one and are open about it tend to like to default to the affiliative, just because that tends to be one that, we all like to be liked, or at least most of us like to be liked. And affiliative leadership does tend to create an atmosphere of being liked. But it does sometimes affect productivity. So it's okay if you lean toward like an affiliative leadership style, but recognize you don't want to be that all the time. The same can be true of like a pace setter leader. Some people are very pace setting style oriented, but recognize that if you do that, you can sometimes overwhelm your employees and they don't always feel like they're communicated to enough. So I do think people gravitate towards one or the other, but a good leader will spread themselves across the 6. That's okay if you kind of move towards one most of the time. I wouldn't be a coercive leader most of the time. If you recognize that you are coercive most of the time, take note of that. Ask yourself if that's appropriate. There are some workplaces that are very dangerous, and you have to be very conscious of people getting injured. If you work on a distribution line or manufacturing plant where there's safety involved, sometimes coercive leadership is required to keep people safe. Sometimes we see coercive leadership in like sports where you've got coaches that are really trying to manage technique and stuff. But so there are times when one of these are going to maybe be more important for a certain industry or company than another. But the reality is a good leader diversifies themselves and is able to know when they're toggling between these. So, but yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I'll just kind of read. Sorry, a lot of these questions all of a sudden kind of came in at once. But see arguments, you have an inexperienced staff, so using authoritative styles where you gravitate. And I think that's great. Yeah, you kind of give them that flexibility, but you also guide them along. Coaching democratic works best in unusual and critical situations. You have to move into coercive. Yeah, I like that. ER, you mentioned a mix of styles with your team. And yes, I like what you said. It's situational. Sometimes skills are needed from each, and that's absolutely the case. And that's the point, actually. You might toggle between all 6 in a single day, and you may even use 2 or 3 within the same conversation or discussion. It's just kind of nice to have it in the back of your mind and say, okay, I'm going to start this meeting in a democratic way, but we're going to end it as a pace setter. Or if people are very resistant and defiant, you might have to move into coercive, right? So you adjust and adapt as the situation needs, but being conscious and aware of the style that you're doing can really help improve the way you communicate certain messages and issues. So I like all these thoughts. These are great. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but hopefully it gives you a chance to be introspective and thoughtful about that. I see a question here towards the end with HV said, it seems to me in the Army environment, it's coercive is the default style. So military environments are going to lean towards coercive. Again, and some industries are going to require that. Military is one of those where you do have to be very precise. You have to make sure you're following rules. And so we do have kind of more of a, that authoritarian where we're managing very, very minute things. However, I think there is still some flexibility, even within like a military style environment, to be maybe affiliative, maybe coaching. But yes, you might lean heavily towards the coercive side of it. But for most workplace environments, people don't want to be in a militarized environment. They don't want to be controlled in every sense of the word. So you don't want to necessarily run your business like a military, unless again safety is of concern, which you might have to be a little bit more. So this does change, but I like the thoughts here that definitely that idea of situational. We want to adapt and adjust, which we'll get to here at the end. So now the step 3, we're going to talk about a leadership vision statement. Thanks for all your comments and questions. I love these. These are great questions. We're going to move into this vision statement, and then we're going to pull these all into scenarios at the end. You'll see how this all works together to be a better communicator as a leader here at the end. So, okay, the leadership vision statement. Let's talk about what this thing is. First of all, this definition comes from Susan Madsen. She's a management coach and author. I like the way that she phrases strong yet. So having a leadership vision statement basically is a way to motivate yourself to improve. It also reminds yourself of how to get better. So there's a significant amount of psychological research that suggests the way we talk about ourselves, we call that self-talk. The way we talk about ourselves actually impacts the way we are in practice. It changes the way we behave. So the words we use to describe ourselves actually impacts the way we act. If we keep telling ourselves over and over again, I am an empathetic leader, we will likely become empathetic. We're going to be more likely to become that than if we never use that term at all. So using specific terminology to describe ourselves really does make a difference in terms of the way we communicate. So it's like a self-communication, and it's an internal voice that we use to talk to ourselves. So we're creating this to help ourselves become better. So to do this, you're going to ask yourself a few questions. This is kind of I call it a brain dump exercise. We're just getting things out on paper here. But ask yourself, what leadership qualities do I want to emphasize the most? So again, those are those things that people respond to, like empathy, honesty. It might even be humility or things like that. But what do you want to emphasize the most about yourself as a leader? Second, how can I use and display these qualities in my working environment? So be thinking, okay, if I want to be an empathetic leader, what does that mean in practice? How do I actually employ empathy in the workplace? So be thinking about how you can actually exhibit that quality. Or if it's humility, what does that mean in practice? Make sure it's something that you can think through and actually perform. All right, and then the third is then, what are the most important values I want to express at work? So values are bigger than yourself. Values are more like maybe you want your employees to be kind. You want kindness in the workplace, or maybe you want creativity in the workplace, or you want efficiency. You want to sort of get rid of the waste or the problems that are happening. So you want to be more efficient there. Whatever those are, or maybe it's even community service. You want your employees to be more involved in the community. So those are values that are bigger than yourself that you want to be employed in the workplace. So kind of write all that stuff down. You get it on paper. Remember that you do have access to the slide deck after the course, so you don't necessarily have to write this down now, but just as a reminder, you do have all of this content there that will be available after the course. Okay, so the second thing, then, you envision your future. So be thinking into the future. Think of where you're at now in comparison to where you want to be. In other words, what are you not very good at yet as a leader and in your workplace, and where can you improve? Remember that this is a statement that's only read by yourself. So this is a personalized vision statement that only you read. So it's okay. You can write whatever you want. Consider the types of projects you'll manage, the types of teams you'll lead, what you'll be accomplishing. Describe your impact in the future, who you're going to be influencing, what pieces you're moving. So again, you're thinking about yourself in the future. So again, this is all just that brain dump exercise. It's not actually putting together your statement yet. Then the next part of this is to write the thing down. And remember that this is for you. It should be motivational. Try to be creative about it. Write it in a way that is interesting, that grabs your own attention. That's also easy to remember. So again, I've got kind of split this in two ways. First of all, your content, you want it to be future oriented. So if there's something you're not good at now, what do you want to be good at in the future? All right. Embody standards of excellence and high ideals, clarifies your purpose and direction, should be challenging and ambitious. And it makes sense for industry market culture and also your own personality. Make sure it's always written in a positive way. So don't ever write things that put your company or your employees in a negative light, but always put that positive approach on it. That's going to make you more likely to be the more influential leader. Okay, but in terms of delivery, the way you write it down, okay, write this in present tense. So rather than saying I will be, say I am. I am an empathetic leader. I am a leader that listens. I am a humble leader, but a confident, leader, something like that. So put it in present tense. Again, using those specific words can impact our actual behavior and practice. You might consider making it like visually descriptive, like using metaphors or things like that. So sometimes we use the word pictures. So talking about things like running races or climbing mountains, it's a marathon, whatever else you want to use. Sometimes those can help. They can help us be it's a little bit more motivational. It's easier to remember as well. So you might consider that. Or maybe even repetition and alliteration. For example, you might say, I want to be the 4 C's of leadership. I want to be curious, compassionate, creative, and constructive, or whatever. So you've got these 4 areas. Again, that can help you remember, and it might help frame what you want to do and be. So those are some ideas to use repetition and alliteration. Communicate with passion and energy, express confidence in there, make sure it's consistent with your actions and personality. So those are just some kind of general guidelines. Obviously, this can feel a little bit vague. So I created a little template. This is a good place to start. I bet you can do better if you write a few of these down. You'll start making them a little bit more interesting. But we'll start here, where you kind of say, I am, you put in some of those characteristics that you want to employ, leader, that is, and talk about how you want to be perceived as a leader. And then describe what you're committed to accomplishing, and then put what your mission is. And you see what this works. If you start filling in the blanks, it'll look like something kind of like this. I'm an honest, empathetic, and impactful leader that is recognized internationally within my industry. I deliver value-added projects to end users by exercising research-driven approaches that my teams respect and use. My mission is to lead a dream team where everyone is playing to their strengths, many of which I helped develop. So I think you can probably do better than this, but this is a good sort of first draft that you can put together. You'll notice there's some specific terms that we're focusing on here. Honest, empathetic, and impactful. You've got the word value-added projects. So what can you do that adds value? Also research-driven approaches, being a research-driven leader, not just in the work you produce, but also the way that you approach your employees. But then also we have that a little bit of that word picture there. We talk about a dream team where everyone is playing to their strengths, kind of metaphorical language there. And then you help develop. So you're developing the dream team. In other words, you recognize that they may have flaws, but you're not talking about their flaws here. You are developing a dream team. So it has that positive spin there. Anyway, this is something that you can use and start employing in your life. So once you have that written down, then you just review it and revise it. Review it frequently. I would suggest looking at it maybe once a week, so it's kind of, fresh on your mind. And then seriously review about every 6 months. So, as times change, as your employees change, as you get better as a leader, and you need to get better in other areas, just keep revising it and improving it. If you can do this, you'll find yourself becoming a better leader. And you'll notice that this self-communication actually makes you a better communicator in the workplace. So, okay. I'm just going to ask this question. Have you ever used a personal vision statement? Would love kind of your thoughts about them. For those of you who have used them, how do you feel like, how well did they work? And if not, why haven't you? Is there anything that's kind of kept you from creating one? We'd love to hear your thoughts about a vision statement. We'll just have a quick discussion about this. And then we're going to pull this all together at the end. Meanwhile, while you're thinking about that discussion question, I just noticed that ES asked an interesting question about the leadership style. He said, what happens when people need both direction to stop swirling over a problem, but also needs to rebuild trust or empathy within a team? How do you flex between coercive and affiliated. Yeah, and it's a good question. And, these are, without knowing your specific employees and specific scenario and, all the circumstances, it's hard to know exactly sometimes what the right is. And I think a lot of this comes through practice. But, yeah, if you said they're swirling over a problem, a lot of times that requires kind of like a pace setting style where you say, okay, look, you feel like there's a problem, but I don't see that as a problem. We're just going to keep moving forward. But if the problem is severe enough that, it's impeding progress, you might need to go more democratic and say, what is the problem? What can we do to resolve this problem? But yeah, if trust has been damaged, then you may have to step back and say, okay, this has gotten too serious. Let's step back. Let's do some team building. Let's not focus on the project for a moment, and let's talk about our strengths, and let's, kind of refocus here. So you kind of take, it depends on the seriousness of each situation, but you have to toggle between these, and it's not always obvious what to do. But we'll look at a few scenarios. So. All right, Deanna, you mentioned you're going to do one now. Great. I encourage you to do so. I think you'll find that if you actually write it down and you're very specific about those words that you're choosing, and then you start to employ it and practice it, I think you'll start to see yourself getting better as a leader. And you'll notice, though, what's interesting is this is directly related to communication. As you start self-communicating, you then start becoming a better communicator as you're employing things like humility and empathy and honesty or whatever you're trying to sort of communicate in the workplace. You become better at that. So, BB, you mentioned you have done it before, and you said it helped you stay focused and take intentional steps that I wouldn't have without having that vision statement. Yeah, I know sometimes it sounds like a tedious task. Sometimes it can feel a little bit silly, I guess. I mean, it's not, but it can feel that way when you're writing these statements down about yourself. But again, research suggests that if we can do that and actually write down specific words that we can hinge on, we're more likely to make that change within ourselves. So I encourage you to do that. All right, so we're going to move into the last part for the last 15 minutes of the class here. We're going to talk about specific scenarios and how to pull this all together. So far, we have talked about, defining what leadership communication is. We've looked at the 4 different modes of communication, talking about using your available means of persuasion, your available tools as a communicator that you have. We've talked about the 6 leadership styles. We've talked about creating a leadership vision statement. Now, if you can sort of put all these together in a nice, neat package, which again, a little easier said than done, but we can put this in a way that now we can start applying this to specific scenarios. So, let's see, MD, I have a good question here before I move on to that. He said, is there much value in doing this if you're not yet in a leadership position? Sure, yes. Oftentimes we call them personal vision statements rather than leadership. So a personal vision statement is just, again, it's about yourself. And I would frame it in a way that works for your workplace environment. You can do it for your life in general. Like if you just want to be a generally happier person or you want to be kinder to people, of course, you can always write those things in a personal statement. They're going to be good no matter what. But if you're doing it specifically for work, make sure you kind of frame it in that way. But yeah, we often call those personal vision statements, and they function in much the same way. But that's a great point, because the goal is always improvement. We as human beings want to improve. We want to be better. We want to work harder. We want to be more creative. We want to, try new things. And we're more likely to do that if that self-talk is written out in some sort of constructive way. So KS, it's a good question. I would not necessarily share the leadership vision statement with people unless you want them to hold you accountable to it. But typically, this is something you communicate only to yourself. Okay, you can create a vision statement for your team though, and collectively you can work on that together, and then you have sort of a team vision statement, and that can also be valuable to. A lot of companies do have. Like acronyms that you use. And, I know I worked with Discover Financial Services. The word Discover, they've turned into kind of it's an acronym for different qualities they want to employ in the workplace. So sometimes those can work for your team, but really for yourself, it's kind of this is self-talk. This is written out, but it's really meant to be for you. Now, if you know that you're really struggling, you're very open to feedback. Sometimes this can be a humbling way to learn. But you can hold yourself accountable by saying, okay, employees, I need to get better at this. Or you can even ask them what to get better at. Put that into your statement and say, I want to ask you how I'm doing. And I want you to be honest. And if you're open to that feedback, you could share it with people. But typically, this is something that's only for yourself. So, all right. All right. Yeah. Thanks for those thoughts. Okay. Let's move into this last step here. Being conscious and strategic in specific scenarios. So we're going to look at 4 different types. Okay. So this is what we're doing. We're going to be conscious of our available means of communication in written, oral, visual, and nonverbal. We're going to know what the leadership style is best, or we're going to at least try out what we think will be best. And then we're going to keep that leadership vision statement in the forefront of our minds so that we can act according to the leader we want to be. So that's kind of the idea. All right, so we're going to walk through the first scenario. This is the one where you are a leader, but you also have to support leaders above you. So top leadership of the company has asked you to implement a new policy or process. Now you have to communicate that to your employees. So I'm going to give a particular scenario. This may or may not be directly related to what you do, but be thinking about this idea of supporting top leadership, even if you're not in this exact type of scenario. So I'll just read this if you want to follow along with me. Imagine you work for an educational institution where a new alcohol policy has been implemented for international travel with students. Due to a recent incident at the college with a professor and a student at a bar, the president, the board of directors, and the legal team determined that no faculty or staff members of the college can drink alcohol in any capacity while in the presence of students. Okay, so you're a dean at the college. You're not top leadership, but you're a dean, and you have been asked to meet with all the faculty in your school who are planning upcoming trips to tell them of this new policy. While explaining the policy, a faculty member blurts out, "This is ridiculous. We are all adults, as are our students. You can't tell me that I can't have a drink of wine while in Italy with my responsible students at a nice restaurant." Several faculty members join in, agreeing collectively that the policy you are conveying is stupid. Okay, so best practice in a scenario like this is you would have thought about the communication before you even enter this scenario, right? So you're about to go give this presentation to the faculty. They're about to go on these trips. But you want to be prepared for this. A better communicator, a better leader will have thought through these things before the situation arrives. Because now, if you're not prepared and employees start jumping on you with this is ridiculous, we're not going to follow this policy, you can feel a little bit unprepared, or you don't know how to respond or react, and it can not necessarily come out in the way that you hope it will. So what do? You first think through your available means. Okay, you're going to be giving this presentation. What's my word choice? How should I describe this new policy? Should I be supporting the decision? Yes, you should support the decision. Give reasons for the policy. This is something to protect employees, it protects students, it protects you and the institution. Legally, this is better for us. Whatever you need to say there. And then nonverbals. Make sure that your posture is good, eye contact, and confident stance, so that people understand that this policy you're conveying is not negotiable. Right? This is clear. And the way that you look at them, the way that you talk about the policy, that impacts the way people will respond to it. If you are looking at them in the eyes, if you're standing confident, if you're saying, this is something that I support, and this is something we must do, you're less likely to get some resistance. Now, if you're kind of slouching, looking down at the ground, and if you say things like, "I'm just the messenger, don't blame me," those types of phrases actually damage your leadership ability. So you want to make sure you're not saying things like that. You are supporting the institution. Remember, as a leader, you represent the institution. So if they make a decision, you need to follow that. If you don't agree with their decision, if there's something that the decision's been made that you feel is unethical, you'll want to address that with them first. But as a leader, you represent the company, and it's important to not sort of throw other leadership under the bus. So that we don't say things like, I'm just the messenger, don't get mad at me, I hate the policy too. Those things diminish the message. So we want to be strong and firm about that. So we were thinking about all those things in our available means. Then you think about your vision statement. Remember, part of the vision statement we created was, I'm an impactful leader. Well, if you want to make an impact, if you want people to listen, the way that you approach that scenario will impact that. So then be thinking about your leadership style. This is one where you would normally go in with kind of a pace-setting mentality, where you say, okay, we've got a new policy. We're all going to follow it. So follow me. Let's do it. kind of like no questions asked. You just kind of move forward. Now, if people do get resistant, if they start talking back, if they're saying, I'm not going to follow that policy, you might have to get more coercive and say, look, I understand you don't like it, but if you don't follow the policy, then you're not going to be able to travel with students. Kind of end the discussion. But hopefully you don't have to get to that point. If you're just very clear about the reasons to begin with, if your communication is very clear up front, if you're given the reasons for the policies, you seem very confident and firm in your stance, you can usually move forward with that pace setting, and people are going to move forward fairly well with that. If you have any comments about any of these scenarios or about how you would respond, please feel free to put them in the chat. We are, of course, wrapping up here in the next couple of minutes. So if you have any last thoughts, please do put those in there. Okay, so another scenario. This is one that you're probably more familiar with. This is where an employee is complaining about another employee. Unfortunately, this happens quite a bit. So let's walk through this one. Imagine you're a project manager that works with several people who must work to submit according to a complex timeline in order to meet deadlines. As a member of your team, Sarah comes to you to complain that Evan, who is also working on the project, is consistently late, never responds to their email, and is deliberately making it harder for others on the team to contribute effectively. Sarah insists that Evan is incompetent and demands that he be removed from the project. Okay, so what do you do? So again, in an ideal scenario, as a leader, you have thought about these types of scenarios before they even happen. So that when an employee comes to complain to you, you've already thought through kind of a process of how you're going to respond. So again, you think about your available means. In this particular scenario, I would encourage you to listen. Sarah does have an opinion that needs to be heard, so listen to Sarah. Ask questions. Rather than making knee-jerk judgments or reactions, quick judgments, don't just assume Sarah's right and Evan's wrong, or don't just assume Sarah's wrong and Evan's right. Listen, and then ask questions. Ask Sarah questions like, are you aware of what's going on in Evan's life right now? Do you know what other projects he may be working on? Do other people in the team feel this way? Have you talked to Evan about this? You can start to ask questions and help Sarah maybe come to a conclusion first. Maybe she has the solution in her head and she just needs to be made aware of that solution. That way it doesn't, escalate into anything else, or you're not making judgments that you shouldn't be. Research the situation possibly, and then also respond after a period of time. So if Sarah's come to you about this, and it does sound serious enough, you might, talk to others, talk to Evan, kind of see what the situation is before you make any judgments about what actions need to take place. So again, think of your vision statement. I'm an empathetic, impactful leader. Empathy, you're going to listen to Sarah, but also be empathetic of Evan's situation. Make sure you're getting all the facts first. I exercise research-driven approaches, so you're going to research this out and really understand the situation before you make the decision. You have a dream team where everyone plays to their strengths. So this is an opportunity to develop both Evan and Sarah. You can coach Sarah, you can coach Evan, and go in kind of that route. And then be thinking about the leadership style. So when this happens, if you think from a coaching mentality first, it's very different than thinking from like a coercive mentality or a pace setting mentality. You say, when this happens, I want to be a coach. I want to coach Sarah, I want to coach Evan, and think of it from that. If it's been damaged enough where affiliated leadership might come in, you might have to kind of bring your team together and walk through the challenges. You might have to have a kind of a conflict resolution message or meeting or something like that. Of course, if Evan is highly, highly problematic and you find out that he really is causing problems, you might have to step in and be a coercive leader with him. But hopefully you don't have to get there, and there are other approaches. So again, this is how we're kind of looking at the scenarios. Your goal as a leader is to be thinking about the types of scenarios you face on a regular basis. And they're very diverse. Whether you're doing motivational speeches, or you're putting meetings together to relay data, or you're, doing whatever. If you have new policies that you have to implement, if you can jot down a variety of scenarios and then think through your available means, think through your vision statement and your leadership style, you'll find that you can start taking the approach strategically and consciously through that. So we'll walk through one more. Imagine you're a branch manager and you're coming off of a difficult year where your store fell far short of corporate goals. In order to reach your goals this coming year, you need to develop a new process that you want your employees to implement that you believe will help save costs. You recognize that not all employees are going to like the new process, as it will change cause a change in their current job description. So this is similar to the first, but you're talking about a new policy. You just want to be clear about the process. Make sure your word choice is clear. Be thinking about counter arguments in advance. If you know in advance that your employees are not going to like this, think through their counter arguments in advance so that you have kind of a prepared response to those. Do listen to their concerns. Give nonverbal cues again, letting them know that this is not debatable. It's not something we can change. This is what we have to do. And then use definitive terms. So this is where maybe absolute language is better. So you're saying, this is the policy we're following. This is why we're following it, rather than saying, I think maybe this might probably be a kind of good solution. Don't be hedging. Be very definitive. This is the new policy. This is where we're moving. And if you can stick to that, it's going to seem non-negotiable there. Stick to your vision statement. Again, leadership style, a lot of times in the persuasion mode, we have to kind of think from a pace-setting mindset, possibly authoritative. If your employees raise enough serious concerns that you're like, oh, yeah, that's actually a really good point, you might open it up for a democratic discussion there and kind of move that route. All right, well, we're just going to kind of close out here in a review. We've got just a few seconds left for the course. But just kind of in summary of what we've talked about, if you have any last comments, certainly put those into the group chat. But remember that leadership communication is controlled, it's purposeful. We're still trying to be authentic, but you want to be aware of what you're doing. Again, be thinking about the full range of communication abilities, especially whenever what you're communicating matters. If it's a really important message, be thinking about all of that. Be thinking about your written, verbal, visual, and nonverbal communication. All four of those. You want to make sure you're kind of aware of the nuances and that you're working to improve those in each of the areas we talked about. Be all 6 leadership styles. Adjust and adapt depending on your company, your situation. And again, you might be multiple of these even in the same moment. Take your vision statement, write it down, review it, and then put it into practice. And then jot down scenarios so that you can then start thinking about how to implement your leadership and your communication in very specific ways so that you can start improving it right away. All right. This is my last thought. I would like to leave with a memorable thought. This comes from James Humes. He is my former presidential speech writer, but I love this idea. He says, every time you have to speak, you are auditioning for leadership. And speak might also be write or, perform or whatever. But every time you're kind of communicating to your employees, they interpret that as your leadership style. And so, if you're very conscious of it, you're more likely to really take control of that leadership. You can take your Joshua Tree epiphany in leadership and start taking ownership over what you're doing in the workplace. All right. Well, that's the course for today. We've hit our 2 hours. I do have several other courses that I teach through O'Reilly. If you enjoyed the course, I would certainly